Hello again, guys. I want to use this lecture to talk about the topics that align to 6.1 of the current unit of study. 6.1 is about the rationales for imperialism. And what College Board wants you to walk away with is an understanding of partially how Europe came to establish global hegemony, but more importantly, how they rationalized it for itself. Because, at least from a 21st century perspective, it seems like an unethical endeavor. So they had to create an ethical system that made sense for them exploiting these various colonies and indigenous, non European indigenous people around the world. So let's talk about that. Now, I want to begin with a simple primer for economics. I told you that I believe that the best way to approach this is from an economic lens, but you guys haven't taken an economics class, with obviously Wyatt and Dio having some background in that. So let's return one more time to the factors of production. If you think about the factors of production, you see those four different variables that lead to an industrialized capitalist society producing something. Now, with the exception of entrepreneurship, which represents those people who come up with the ideas for starting a new business, the other three factors of production outside of what that graph that I showed you says enterprise, which I know as entrepreneurship, the more common term, are land, labor, and capital. Now, land represents more than anything, not the actual land itself, but the raw materials that it possesses. Labor obviously represents the workforce within the context of what we're studying, though cheap labor is particularly important. That third category called capital, sometimes students have difficulty wrapping their heads around it, and that category capital as a factor of production is where we get the term capitalism. So that third factor of production, capital, represents all man-made things that go into the production of goods. So you have things called, like, if you put a qualifier before capital, you can have financial capital, which represents the money that a company invests in itself to improve its productive capacity. It also represents things like human capital, and that's the amount of training and education that its workforce has, so that the workers are more productive. It also represents something called physical capital, and those are the tools and the space for working that workers have, with the idea if they have better tools and more space to work with, they are more productive. So keep in mind this concept of capital, because it's very much key from my approach to understanding this current unit of study, the consequences of industrialization. Okay, so with a working definition of capital, let's talk about how the Europeans rationalized what they did and how they came to that conclusion. So the Industrial Revolution creates a productive boom in Europe. I know that you understand that, but with that productive boom, they also now have, the Europeans now have this necessity to increase their capital, whether it's labor, whether it's human capital, the training of the labor, whether it's raw materials, or whether it's the various different inventions and machines that they use to increase their productive capacity. Now, once the Industrial Revolution occurs in the mid 18th century, that's what we call the First Industrial Revolution, this demand for capital, especially in the form of raw materials coming from the various non-European colonies that they begin to conquer, explains from an economic perspective why they did what they did. Now, how did they colonize? How did they conquer so easily? Now, part of that, and Strayer focuses on this, is the fact that each one of these places they went to, whether it was the Americas, whether it was Africa, whether it was the Middle East, South Asia, Southeast Asia a little bit later, or China, the context of that is each one of these geographic regions were experiencing local strife. So they had their own internal problems, and some of those internal problems had been going on for centuries. The Europeans were able to take advantage of that. They could play certain groups off another who were vying for power, or they took advantage of the discord that existed in each of these regions. So obviously a huge reason that the Europeans were able to conquer was because of their technological superiority, especially when those technologies were invested in new kinds of military equipment. But the other half of that story is they went into areas that were destabilized for different reasons. And the different areas are destabilized for different reasons. Like there's no kind of like universal explanation. What was causing social disintegration in China is different than what was occurring in India, is different than what was occurring in Dar al-Islam, is different than Africa, is different than Americas. You get the idea. Okay, so industrialization leads to capitalism. One of the defining characteristics of capitalism is competition. Competition between the various European states led to overproduction. This concept of producing more than you need was actually one of the central criticisms of Karl Marx in the Communist Manifesto. He said one of the major flaws of capitalism is its tendency to overproduce. The overproduction of goods in Europe created a need for them to create more markets for them to sell in. So it's not just a question of the Europeans coming in, colonizing, and then following a mercantilist policy and taking all of these raw materials back to the home country, but it also has to do about European exports. The Europeans have to take these new industrial products, whether it's cotton textiles or various machines. They need to be able to sell them to the rest of the world. So the economic relationships between the home European countries and the colonies goes both ways. They're importing raw materials, they're taking those raw materials, they're turning them into finished goods, and then they're selling them back to the colonies. At the same time that this is happening, there is a growing sense of nationalism in Europe. There's a sense of identity that did not exist before this high modern era, before the imperial age. There wasn't a sense of like, I'm German, I'm English, I'm Italian. That was not a thing until we get to this period from 1750 to 1914. You've been calling it the long 19th century. The College Board is now calling it the imperial age, but we're talking about the same thing. From the first industrial revolution to the second industrial revolution, and then ending with World War I. So there's a sense of belonging to a country within Europe. We call that nationalism. And then there's obviously the economic context of capitalism. So there's economic competition between the European states. But then there's also political, social, cultural competition too, because people have this sense of identity. I'm switching gears a little bit. It's all related, so bear with me. Now let's talk about the concept of great power status. With this sense of nationalism, fueled by the productive expansion allowed by the Industrial Revolution, it became accepted among European states, especially the great power European states. And great power is defined as those European states that were most economically advanced and then had large spheres of influence, primarily through their possession of colonies. They came to the conclusion, and within the context of the long 19th century, they may have been right, in order to maintain their status as a great power, they had to imperialize. They had to have access to these different forms of capital that were provided by the colonies that they conquered. So you now have political competition and economic competition within these great power European states. Okay, so let me transition into the final part of this lecture. So we're talking about Europe's justification for colonialism, which again, from a 21st century perspective, is highly unethical. But within the 19th century, it had some logical basis that were based on pseudoscience and fallacies and artificial senses of cultural superiority. This final part of my lecture is extremely important, and it seems to be an idea that the College Board wants you to walk away with feeling pretty confident about. And if you look at my unit plan, you'll notice that a lot of the terms under 6.1 have to deal with this. You'll see terms like scientific racism, social Darwinism, white man's burden, the noble savage, and the civilizing mission. And I want to show you how all those concepts come together and fit into this economic system. So the Europeans exploited non-European colonies for access to their capital. Then simultaneously, and I believe as a result of this, senses of nationalism, of belonging to a single home country in Europe came to be. And when you have these two forces of industrialization along with capitalism tied to feelings of nationalism and national identity, now there had to be something under the social lens of justifying why they were basically stealing other people's resources. And that comes to an idea that I think Mr. McMaster did a fairly good job with you guys last year, and it's the idea that they applied new scientific concepts in the 19th century, particularly Charles Darwin's On the Origin of the Species and his theory of natural selection, and they took that very profound world-changing idea and then applied it to human races. In the process of that, they created the concept of races of man, which that concept didn't exist prior to the 19th century, not in a fully formed sense. So they used Darwinism, they came up with social Darwinism, they came up with various forms of scientific racism. Scientific racism was very much a thing, and some of the best universities in Britain, in France, and Germany had entire majors dedicated to exploring the differences between human races. And it's completely predictable, but they would inevitably come to the conclusion that white European races were at the top of the racial hierarchy. Very self-serving argument, and it has been proven wrong. I mean, racism is silly for a number of reasons, but when you look at it scientifically, it's based on absolutely nothing. It is absolutely a fallacy. Scientifically, you get the concept of scientific racism and social Darwinism when we look at it from people who seem to be, to a degree, uncomfortable going in and conquer these people. They still justified imperialism with the concept that they were bringing Christianity to non-European indigenous people. They were civilizing them, uplifting them technologically and culturally. And even people who were kind of most passionately against imperialism still tacitly supported it by coming up with the concept of the noble savage. And the idea here is that non-European indigenous people had a lot of worth. They had a lot of lessons that they could teach European people. But again, even using that concept, noble savage, is obviously offensive and condescending, and fails to look at non-European indigenous people as equal to white Europeans. So even those people who were like, we should slow down and we should be respectful of these places we're colonizing, weren't that opposed to it. One group that was opposed to imperialism, to their credit in the 19th century, were people who adhered to Marxist radical interpretation of socialism. I think that's it. If there's any concepts you want to discuss and understand better, please hit me up on the WeChat. A lot of the ideas that I'm bringing forward in this lecture, I'm going to try to design a short answer question quiz on Monday that addresses them explicitly. So you may want to go back and rewatch this video and take notes. Bye, guys. See you Monday.